Montana Territory, spring of 1879. The wind howled low through the valley as Madeleine Sutton tightened her shawl and stepped off the stagecoach into the dirt and dust of Bitter Creek. Her boots sank slightly into the softened ground, spring rain having passed through just the night before. Her hands trembled, but not from the cold. She had not wept in 2 days. That felt like progress. A boy's small hand tugged at her skirt. "Ma," Joseph said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is this where we live now?" She looked down into her son's eyes, then at her daughter, Jane, who stood just behind him. Both children had their father's dark hair and none of his cruelty. That was a mercy. Madeleine forced a smile. "Yes, baby. This is home now." The town was small buildings spaced out more than clustered. A mercantile, a telegraph office, and a stable with half the roof missing. At the far end of the street stood a saloon with a faded sign swinging in the breeze. It was not much, but it was far from Kansas, and farther still from the man who had left them with nothing but bruises and debts. She did not see the cowboy until he stepped out from under the overhang of the blacksmith's barn. Wiping his hands on a rag and watching her like he already knew something about her she had not told anyone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and a slow, steady gaze. He wore a wide-brimmed hat low over his eyes, but when he saw her children, he tipped it back and walked over. "You need help with your trunk?" he asked. Madeleine narrowed her eyes. "We can manage." The man nodded once, then knelt beside Joseph and Jane. "You too hungry?" Joseph looked to Madeleine for approval. She hesitated. Her pride was worn thin, but not gone. "We're fine," she said. "We have food." The man straightened. "Name's Boone Hartley. I own the livery yard and about 20 head of half-wild horses that keep me up most nights. I also make decent stew, if you change your mind." He turned and walked back toward the barn without waiting for a reply. That night, in the small cabin behind the mercantile that the stage driver had said was empty and free to squat in, Madeleine lit the stove with shaking fingers. The children huddled close, hungry despite what she had said earlier. They had eaten nothing since dawn. Boone Hartley brought soup just after sunset. He knocked once, then left the pot on the porch. She opened the door and stared down at it like it was a trick. It smelled of beans, salt pork, and kindness. She fed her children first, then sat up by the window while they slept, watching the light flicker in the barn across the street until she could not keep her eyes open. The next morning, she returned the pot, scrubbed clean and still warm from the stove. Boone leaned against the fence, watching one of his horses circle the corral. He smiled when he saw her. "You made it through the first night." "I am not here for charity," she said. "We will find work." He nodded, still watching the horse. "Then I will keep my meals out of your way. But if you ever want a job, I could use help with the ledgers. I am better with reins than numbers." Madeleine looked at the dirt under her nails. "I will think about it." She did not think about it. She showed up the next day, children in tow, and asked to see the books. By the end of the week, she knew Boone's handwriting and his way of thinking. He was careful, slow to speak, and rarely smiled, but when he did, it stayed with her longer than she liked to admit. One afternoon, while Joseph played with the barn cat and Jane tried to braid a horse's mane, Boone handed Madeleine a tin cup of coffee and leaned against the post beside her. "You came here alone with 2 children," he said. "That takes grit." "I came here with nothing left to lose," she replied. He looked at her for a long moment. "I do not believe that. You still have them." She turned her face away quickly, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "I am done with love," she said quietly. "It only leaves you hollow." Boone's voice was low, steady. "Then let me be the start, not the end." She turned back to him, startled. "I am not asking for anything," he said. "Not now. But I see the way you hold them close. The way you watch every man who walks by like he might be a threat. You have been hurt, but I am not him. Madeleine took a step back. I do not know who you are. You will, he said simply. The days passed. Spring warmed into early summer. The children laughed more. Joseph ran barefoot through the grass behind the barn. Jane rode a pony Boone had set aside for her with a patient, gentle spirit. Madeleine still flinched at sudden noises, still woke from dreams of fists and shouting but less often. One morning, Boone found her outside the cabin, staring at the sunrise with her arms wrapped around herself. I dreamed he came back, she said. Boone nodded. But he did not. No, she said. You did. He took a slow step closer. I will keep coming back. She looked at him for a long time. Then she reached out, just once, and touched his hand. They did not speak of love again for a while, but she never gave back the tin cup he had given her. And every morning he found it on the fence post, filled with hot coffee. One evening, Joseph ran into the barn shouting, Jane is hurt! Boone and Madeleine ran together. Jane had fallen from the pony, nothing broken, but scraped and frightened. Boone carried her inside, cleaned the wound, and sat with her until she fell asleep. Madeleine watched him, tears in her eyes. You are kind to them. I care about them, he said. Because I care about you. She reached for his hand this time and he held it. I never thought I would feel safe again, she whispered. Boone leaned his forehead against hers. You are safe now, and not just safe. You are wanted. She let herself cry, just once, in his arms. And when he kissed her, it was not rushed. It was steady, real. The beginning of something new. Something she never thought she would have again. The first thunderstorm came in late May, loud as cannon fire across the ridgeline. Madeleine bolted upright in her cot, heart lodged somewhere between fear and memory. Jane stirred beside her, and Joseph, wrapped in a quilt on the floor, whimpered at the sharp crack that followed the lightning. She swung her legs down and moved to the door, just to look. Rain sheeted down from the black sky, the cabin roof holding strong, but wind snapped at the shutters. Boone's barn stood solid across the way, lamplight glowing from a small window in the loft. She hadn't known he stayed there at night. Joseph, she said quietly, come up here. He didn't argue. Once he was settled between her and Jane, she lay back, staring into the dark rafters, wondering how long it would take for peace to feel ordinary. The rain hadn't let up by morning. A knock came just after dawn. Boone stood on the porch, boots soaked, hat dripping, a folded oilcloth bundle under one arm. Brought dry wood, he said. She stepped back to let him in. He didn't glance around the room, didn't comment on the makeshift beds or the kettle boiling soft on the stove. He crouched beside the fireplace, stacking the wood carefully, then stood and set one boot against the hearth to dry. You sleep upstairs? She asked, nodding toward the barn. He shrugged. Loft's warm, closer to the horses. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You always take care of everything whether it's asked of you or not? Boone looked over at her, slow and even. No, just when it matters. Joseph yawned from the cot, and Boone's gaze flicked toward the boy. He still favor carving? I saw him whittling on a stick last week. Madeleine nodded. He's got more patience with a knife than I ever did with a needle. I've got some cedar scrap. Might bring it by. She gave him a long look. You don't need to keep giving. I know, he said, stepping back toward the door. But I want to. The wind had eased by midday, leaving the yard muddied and the sky low with leftover gray. Boone came back that evening with a bundle of cedar and a small paring knife, the handle wrapped in deerskin. He handed it to Joseph without ceremony. then sat in the dirt beside the porch, his back against the support post. Madeleine stepped out quietly and lowered herself beside him. "I don't know what to do with a man like you," she said. Boone didn't look at her. "What kind of man is that? One who asks for nothing and still gives more than he should." He tipped his head back, eyes on the thinning clouds. "You ever think maybe I give because I've been empty, too?" She turned to him, surprise flickering across her face. "I lost a brother," he said. "Winter of '72. Fever took him in 2 days. We'd been driving cattle through the Judith Basin, and I thought I was keeping him warm enough. But I was wrong. After that, I stopped letting folks get close." Madeleine watched him in silence. "I reckon I know what it feels like to shut the door on the world. I did it for years. But I ain't proud of how quiet life got after." The children's laughter carried from inside. Joseph was showing Jane how to round the edge of the wood without splitting it. She exhaled slowly. "You think there's a way back from all that? I think what we choose now says more than what we lost then." The next day, Boone asked if Jane might help him brush the gentler horses. Madeleine watched from the fence as her daughter stood on a wooden crate, both hands gripping the brush like it was something sacred. Boone didn't hover. He let her find her rhythm, only stepping in when the pony flinched. Later, he handed Madeleine a worn book. "It's a journal," he said. "Empty pages. Thought you might want it." She took it, fingers grazing the leather cover. "Why? You've been carrying a lot. Sometimes it helps to lay it down, even if it's just on a page." She opened it that night, after the children had gone quiet. She didn't write about the past. Not yet. She wrote what Jane had said at breakfast, how Joseph had laughed when Boone made the cat sneeze with a feather. She wrote about Boone's hands, how they moved slow but sure, like he never rushed anything worth doing. June brought warmth thick enough for bare arms and long walks. One evening, Boone found her seated on the hill behind the barn, skirt tucked beneath her knees, the journal open beside her. "You been writing?" he asked, easing down beside her. She nodded. "Every day." He glanced sideways. "You ever write about me?" Her smile was faint, but steady. "Sometimes." He said nothing for a while. Then, "I think about you more than's proper." She turned, startled. "Why tell me that now?" "Because I'm not asking for promises," he said. "I just want you to know I'm here, day after day. And I'll be here the next one, too." Madeleine looked out across the field, where the sun dipped low, lighting the grass in gold. "I haven't said yes," she whispered. Boone nodded. "I'll wait." She reached over and closed her hand around his. "Don't wait too long." He didn't speak, but he didn't let go either. And when the breeze picked up, rustling the tall grass around them, she didn't move away. The July heat settled into the valley with a heaviness that clung to skin and slowed every step. Dust rose from the road in lazy spirals, and the air smelled of pine pitch and sun-warmed leather. Madeleine pulled the last sheet from the line behind the cabin and folded it into the basket with the others, her hands moving slower than usual. Her back ached, but there was satisfaction in the weight of work done. From across the yard, Boone's voice carried low and steady as he spoke to a man tying off a mule at the livery gate. She couldn't hear the words, but the tone told her enough, measured, polite, with no need for more than was necessary. She liked that about him. He never filled silence just to fill it. Joseph and Jane were inside with Miss O'Connell, the schoolmistress who had taken to coming by twice a week to give lessons. In exchange, Madeleine mended her stockings and kept her in eggs from the hens Boone had helped them by last month. The arrangement felt fair, and more importantly, it gave the children a rhythm. Boone met her by the fence when the man left, brushing his palms against his trousers. "He's driving horses up from Miles City. Wants to trade for a few of mine." She gave a small nod. "You trust him? He's got a clean name." But he's impatient. She glanced back toward the barn. You won't be rushed. No, he said. Then, after a moment, you been sleeping all right? I wake up before the birds do, she said. But I don't startle anymore, if that's what you mean. He rested his forearms on the fence. I wake up early too. She looked at him sidelong. I know. They stood there until the sun dipped lower, the light shifting gold across the fields. Boone cleared his throat once and shifted his weight. I've been thinking about building a proper house. She didn't answer right away. What for? I've lived like I'm just passing through for too long. His gaze didn't waver. I want something that stays. Madeleine folded her arms. You sure that's not just the heat talking? He shook his head. I've had the lumber stacked and covered since spring. That long. Was waiting to be sure. She watched the way he kept his hands still even when he was nervous. And you are now? He nodded once. She looked down at her boots, then out at the land. You'll need help with the frame. I was hoping you'd say that. The next morning, Boone arrived with a wagon half loaded with planks and beams, and Joseph ran to help without being asked. They worked all day, joined by a widower from the next farm over and a quiet boy from the telegraph office who knew how to drive nails straight. Jane brought water in a chipped pitcher, proud as anything. Madeleine worked beside Boone, handing him tools, measuring lengths, marking joints. She didn't ask what the rooms would be or where the windows would go. She just focused on the work. But by dusk, when the first corner post stood solid in the earth, she touched one with her palm and let her eyes close for a moment. That night, Boone didn't go back to the barn. He sat on the porch with her after the children went to bed, both of them quiet until the stars came out. You ever think about what you want? He asked. She traced a knot in the porch rail with her fingertip. I used to think wanting was dangerous. And now, I'm still learning. Boone leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'd like to build that house with a room for you, and the children. Not just a place to sleep, but a place that's yours too. She looked at him carefully. You're not asking me this because you feel sorry for me? He looked up, held her gaze. I'm asking because I care more than I've ever said. She didn't speak right away. Then, I still have days where I feel like I don't deserve anything soft. Boone's voice was low. Then I'll be the one who remembers for you. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wild sage. Madeleine reached out slowly and rested her hand on his where it lay against the railing. I want to know what it feels like, she said, to choose something good, and not just for the children. Boone turned his hand under hers and held it. This isn't just good, Madeleine. It's lasting. She didn't pull away. By the end of the week, the walls were up. The roof would come next. Joseph hammered in wooden pegs with a grin too big for his face, and Jane had already claimed the west-facing corner for her books and her cat. Madeleine stood in the doorway as Boone ran a hand over the frame. You laid every beam like you've done this before, she said. He smiled, not at her but at the house. Never had the right reason till now. She stepped closer. I want to stay. He looked at her slowly. With me. With you, she said. Not because I have to, because I choose to. Boone reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering at her cheek. Then we'll start here. She leaned into him, quiet and sure, and he kissed her, soft and steady. No rush, no asking, just promise. In the space between heartbeat and breath, she let herself believe in a life not built on escape, but on hope. And it held. The roof went up beneath a pale midday sky that threatened rain but never followed through. By the time the rafters were braced and the shingles stacked, Madeleine had a line of calluses along her palm and the beginnings of a sunburn across her nose. Boone handed her a dipped cloth without a word, and she pressed it to her skin, grateful for the cool. Inside, the walls still smelled of raw pine. Joseph had taken to pacing the bare floor, counting the steps from one end of the house to the other. Jane sat near the hearth, tracing her finger through the dust and humming a hymn Madeleine didn't recognize. The quiet didn't feel heavy anymore, it felt earned. Boone stood beside the frame of what would be the front door and watched the horizon with eyes narrowed against the light. Madeleine joined him, brushing the sawdust from her skirts. "You thinking about something?" she asked. He answered without looking over. "Thinking about how I never pictured this." This? Standing still, she glanced at his profile. "Does it feel wrong?" "No," he said. "Just unfamiliar." A breeze stirred the grasses, and she waited, letting the moment stretch. "I got a letter," he said finally. "From my mother's sister. She's back in Arkansas. Wants to know if I'm ever coming through." "Are you?" He turned toward her. "Not anymore." She folded her arms, voice low. "You haven't said much about family." "Not much to say. My folks died early. My uncle raised us, me and my brother. He taught us horses and hard words. Not much else." "Do you miss them?" Boone shrugged. "I miss who I thought they were." Madeleine looked out across the pasture. "I used to think I was the only one who came from something broken." Boone's voice was quiet. "Maybe that's why this matters." She nodded slowly. "It does." Later that week, Boone brought up a wagon load of river stones and laid them out by hand, building the base for a chimney. Madeleine watched from the porch, a needle in her hand and a new curtain half stitched in her lap. Her fingers moved steady, but her mind wandered. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked, not looking up. Boone paused, one stone balanced in his hands. "I think about building something that lasts, if that's what you mean." She set the needle down. "It's not a small thing. It's vows. Shared land. Shared name. I know what it means." "Do you?" He stood, wiping dust from his palms. "I know it means waking up beside someone every day and choosing them again. Even when it's hard. Especially then." She looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "I've never been chosen like that." Boone stepped closer, his voice firm but quiet. "Then let me be the first who does it right." Madeleine didn't speak, but she didn't look away. Boone reached into his coat pocket and held out a small iron key. "What's this?" "Lock for the front door. Thought maybe you ought to be the one to have it first." Her hand wrapped around the key, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of something that belonged to her alone. That night, she stood in the half-finished doorway and watched the lantern light spill across the floorboards. Boone was inside, helping Joseph straighten a crooked shelf while Jane braided strips of muslin for a rug. The air smelled of wood smoke and something else, something steadier. Madeleine stepped inside and closed the door behind her. It didn't have hinges yet, but the motion felt like a promise. Boone looked up, smiling faintly. She crossed the room, slow, deliberate, and took his hand. "If I say yes," she said, "I don't want it to be out of gratitude or comfort." "It won't be," he said. "I want it to be because I believe in it. In you. In this." Boone's hand tightened around hers. "Then say yes." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." Behind them, Jane looked up from her rug and Joseph grinned wide, but neither child said a word. The moment didn't need it. Madeleine leaned into Boone, her forehead resting lightly against his chest. His arms came around her, solid and sure. Outside, the wind shifted west, and the clouds broke just enough for moonlight to touch the roof of their home. The wedding was held on a Sunday, quiet and warm, beneath a cottonwood tree at the edge of Boone's pasture. The preacher rode in from White Bluff with dust on his collar and a Bible worn soft at the spine. No bells, no lace, just a circle of neighbors, a table covered in fresh bread and jars of wild plum preserves, and the sound of meadowlarks stitching the silence. Madeleine wore a dress she had sewn from blue calico Boone had bartered for 2 towns over, the fabric soft and plain, the sleeves long to her wrists. Her hair was braided back, pinned firm with the carved comb Jane had offered up from her small wooden box of treasures. Boone had shaved close that morning, the edge of his jaw careful and clean. His shirt was linen, pressed flat, and the vest stitched by Madeleine's hand just a week before. He stood beneath the tree waiting, his hat in his hands and his eyes on her as she walked toward him. Joseph and Jane stood at her sides, solemn and proud. Joseph had tied his own boots for the first time that morning. Jane had tucked a sprig of sage into the sash at her waist. When the vows were spoken, Boone's voice didn't waver. He looked Madeleine in the eye and said every word like he meant it from bone to breath. She answered steady, her fingers curled in his, her gaze unflinching. When he kissed her, it was quiet but sure, and Joseph hooped once before Jane elbowed him. They ate under the tree after, passing tin plates and sipping coffee boiled thick and strong. Someone brought a fiddle, and though neither Boone nor Madeleine danced, they sat with their shoulders touching and listened while the children ran in loose circles through the grass. That night the house held them all. The hearth glowed low, and the scent of pine resin lingered on the walls. Jane and Joseph slept in their room with the door pulled nearly closed. Madeleine sat on the quilt Boone had laid over the bed, brushing her hair out in slow, even strokes. Boone leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded without turning. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and find it undone." "It won't be," he said. "Not now. Not ever." She set the brush down and met his eyes in the mirror. "Does it scare you, this kind of stillness?" "I used to think it would," he said. "But I've learned that peace is earned. You and me, we earned it." She turned and reached for him, drawing him close. "Then stay with me. Let's let the quiet come." The lamp burned low, and the wind outside swept soft across the shutters. They lay side by side beneath the quilt she'd patched with scraps from their first month's fabrics from his shirts, her apron, Jane's old dress hem. It was a map of beginnings. Days passed, then weeks. The land shifted into harvest, golden and dry. Boone rose before dawn to tend the horses and returned home to find breakfast on the table and Joseph already outside with a bridle slung over his shoulder. Jane spent her mornings at the desk Boone had built into the wall beside the hearth, copying her letters and drawing the animals she saw through the window, the fox that visited on Sundays, the hawk that nested near the well. Madeleine kept the home, and more than that, she kept the rhythm. She mended, cooked, and read aloud in the evenings. She laughed more. The sound had taken time to return, but now it came freely. Boone watched her sometimes when she didn't know, when she leaned over a pot, when she untangled Jane's hair, when she sat at the window with her journal open on her knee. One evening, after Joseph had gone to bed early with a sore tooth and Jane had fallen asleep in the chair with a book open across her chest, Boone sat across from Madeleine at the kitchen table, his hands folded around a cup of coffee. "I meant to ask," he said. "You still writing?" She nodded. "Most nights." "What about?" "Small things," she said. "Things I don't want to forget." Boone leaned forward slightly. "Will you ever let me read it?" She smiled, slow and thoughtful. "I think it's more for remembering than sharing." He reached across the table and touched her wrist. "Then I'll just keep asking." That fall, Boone took Jane out riding past the ridge, showing her where to watch for loose shale and how to gauge the wind. Joseph helped fix the barn roof, learning each nail's weight and listening close when Boone explained the way with swells after rain. Madeleine planted bulbs along the fence line, tucking each one deep with careful hands. "Next spring," she said, "we'll have color." Winter came early, but the house held firm. Snow lined the roof, and smoke curled steady from the chimney. Boone carved a new shelf for the kitchen, and Madeleine lined it with jars she'd sealed herself pickled onions, stewed apples, and rosehip preserves. One evening, as the fire crackled low and the children played checkers on the rug, Boone touched Madeleine's hand and said, "This feels like something I never knew I could have." She kissed his shoulder and said, "It's something we made." Years passed. The house weathered each season with grace. The children grew. Jane learned to ride bareback and read Latin. Joseph took to the forge, apprenticing with the blacksmith who'd once fixed the wagon wheel on their first month in Bitter Creek. He had Boone's quiet steadiness. Jane had Madeleine's unflinching eyes. Boone and Madeleine grew older together, never apart. Their days were marked by the ordinary, the turn of bread dough, the soft creak of the porch boards, the steady thrum of wind across the grass. And their love never needed declaring, because it lived in every small gesture, the way he filled her cup first, the way she folded his shirts with the seams lined just so, the way they reached for each other's hands in the dark without thinking. And when spring finally came and the bulbs bloomed in a riot of yellow and white along the fence line, Madeleine stood beside Boone at the window and said, "See, I told you we'd have color." He kissed her temple and said, "You were right." They had built a life not from dreams, but from choice. And it held. Always.